too, and you're dealing with a very complex situation. So the first thing we need to know is that relationships are complicated. And today, as I wrote in the email, for those of you that are getting the email, I wrote the email last night because of the holiday of Shavuot. I wasn't on my pregame game enough to get it out on, it would have been Thursday. Friday was already the holiday, so I got it out last night. So apologies for the late notice. Here's the deal. I wrote that in the age of Corona, in the age of COVID-19, we have another element, we have another challenge in relationships, and that is perhaps we might be separated from someone that we love, and we can't see them in person. Or perhaps we're isolated with someone that we love, but a little too isolated with them, if you know what I mean, right? Maybe a little too close quarters. So you have this duality of being either separated unnaturally or being forced together in a sense unnaturally. And as experts are saying, if you study relationships, it's a wonderful laboratory to have at your disposal. This is fabulous. This is like, you're excited about this because you're able to see people in different habitats, so to speak, in different environments, and it's extremely fascinating to see how people react under different circumstances. How this is bringing some couples together, some families together, and driving others further apart. So what I want to spend some time today is talking about what I termed in the email, and again, if you're not getting the email, just email me and I'll get you on the Kabbalah Coffee email list, is what I termed modern love. Love in 2020. And again, it could be love in a marriage, it could be love in a family, it could be love in a friendship, or love thy neighbor as thyself. I'm not sure why I'm saying thy now, other than I'm waxing biblical. So anyway, the point is like this. How do we up our love game? And the truth is, we need more love than ever today. I've maintained over the last 6-7 months, which is why I started this series every Sunday morning, this series on learning how to love, is that this is the great challenge of our generation. Loving the other, in whatever context it is, in whatever relationship dynamic it is. Loving the other and loving oneself, for that matter, is the greatest challenge, or the great challenge of our generation. It is. And maybe it's been the great challenge of all generations, very possible, but I wasn't around then. So what are you going to do? The great challenge of our generation is truly loving the other, truly respecting the other, truly tolerating the other, truly and genuinely getting along, and not looking to harm the other, not looking to hate the other. True acceptance, true tolerance, true love. This is the challenge of our generation. So in today's context, I want to speak about in today's class, I want to speak about love in the context of the four worlds. Let me give you a little bit of a Kabbalistic crash course on the four worlds as we jump into this topic. So here's the basics. Kabbalah teaches that there are multiple dimensions of reality. And we can speak about this in many different ways. But one way to imagine this construct is vertical worlds stacked on top of each other. That's by no means an absolute truth as to how it's structured, because especially when you get into spiritual realms, things don't take up the type of space that we know, and things aren't higher or lower as we know them to be here in the physical sense, right? Like I would say that my hand is higher than my cup. No, that's not true spiritually. But there is a notion of spiritual hierarchy or hierarchy within the higher realms. So in general, Kabbalah speaks of realities as being stacked upon each other vertically. The higher you go, the more amount of light that there is, the greater light there is. So go higher, more light. Go lower, less light. What light are we talking about? Obviously, maybe not so obviously, we're not talking about physical light, but spiritual light. Well, what's spiritual light? And why call it light? Why call it something that it's not? If it's some sort of spirituality, then call it that, but why use the term light? So let's speak about light for a moment. The Kabbalists love using the term light, as opposed to a word that other scholars used, like the Jewish philosophers, which is shefa, which means flow. Let me explain. There's ar, which is light. If you want to spell it in Hebrew or if you want to imagine it in the English, R would be O-R or O-H-R, depending if you want to kind of emphasize the distinction between the English term or. So R is light. Shefa, S-H-E-F-A, shefa means flow. What's the difference? So the difference is, imagine a liquid being poured from one cup to the other. And as I talk about liquid, l'chaim. Not l'chaim, but cheers. Or to life. Okay, so imagine you have 2 cups. Yeah? And you have liquid in the one, but now you want liquid in the other cup. So you take cup A and you pour from cup A into cup B. So you've now transferred the liquid. Max, hold out that cup. Let's do the example. I'm going to pour from mine into yours. I'm kidding. That's going to mess up my keyboard. Okay. So what happens? You take the liquid from the one cup and you pour it into the second cup, and now you've moved the liquid. But you know what else has happened? As the second cup has gained liquid, the first cup has... Help me out here? Lost liquid. Because the nature of shefa, flow, is that if you move it, if you divert it, if you transfer it, it diminishes from the original. Light is very different. Why is light different? Take one candle and light a second candle, and your first candle, if done properly, right? Your mileage may vary, who knows? But if done properly, your first candle should remain lit while the second candle is now lit, which means you have now doubled the amount of light, whereas when it comes to liquid, you've divided the amount of liquid amongst 2 cups. Are you with me? It's basic math. When it comes to shefa, flow, you're dividing the flow. The more you multiply it, you're actually dividing it. Whereas when it comes to light, when you multiply it, you're actually multiplying it. Correct? This is the difference between power and leadership. Power is divided, leadership is multiplied. So, if I am the only one calling the shots, if I have all the power, and then you jump in on this, and now you become also a partner with me in this power, right, in whatever area that is, guess what? I have now lost power. I had 100% of the power, and now I only have 50% of the power because you have the other 50% of the power. So that's a loss. We've divided the power. By the way, in general, people don't like that. Right? Especially people that like power. They don't like dividing power. What about influence? Influence is different. Someone who's an influencer, I don't mean, maybe that's a bad word to use nowadays in 2020. I don't mean, an influencer for profit. But I mean someone who's really influencing others. Right?
A light bearer.
A light bearer. Good. Yeah. Somebody who's really inspirational. Yeah? They inspire someone else to also be an inspiration to others. Has their inspiration diminished? Of course not. It's only multiplied. Because now instead of one person doing the inspiring, you have now another person doing the inspiring. That's fantastic. That's multiplying the influence. So power is divided, influence is multiplied. By the way, it's important to know, right? when you think about leadership, or you think about parenting, or you think about education? Is the dynamic one of power, which is going to be very selfish, greedy? It's going to be very wary of any sort of competition. Or is the model one rather of influence, which does not shy away from competition or from others joining, right? Because the more, the merrier, because there's more influence. So in a similar way, we have the difference between what we call shefa and ar. Shefa is, again, a flow. Think about a flow of water where you're pouring from one to the other, one cup to the other. So I had a cup that was 100% full and the other cup was 0% full. And now I poured half of the contents of the cup from one to the other. Now I have two cups that are 50% full. The second one has gained. The first one has lost. It's a zero-sum game. There's only so much liquid to go around. Whereas when it comes to light, light is magnified. 100% light, 200. Now I have another light that's 100%. I haven't lost anything. I've only given. There's only a benefit. There's only a gain here. So that's Ar and Shefa, light and influence. So when the Kabbalists speak of light, the Kabbalists speak of light very specifically. Spiritual light. Why spiritual light? Why light? It's not the light in your room right now. It's not the light outside, the light of the sun. It's not light, physical light that we see as bright, right? It's not that light. What is it? It means a spiritual presence, a spiritual reality, a spiritual awareness that is pervasive in that space. Because another feature of light, tied into this first feature of light versus Ar versus Shefa that I just explained, is that not only is light not separated and diminished from its source, but moreover, light always reflects its source. So that when you look at the light, what you're seeing is not light. I don't mean the source of light now. I mean the light that's emanating from source, right? It's not like Shefa when I pour the water from the first source. It's now removed and it can stand independently from that original source. Now I've divided into two places. When it comes to light, let's say before I light a second candle, the light itself, the one candle itself, that's shining and illuminating my room, right? So that light, or the sun for that matter, right? The sunlight outside. I see we have a few people outside now. It looks beautiful. Leonora, Sandy, right? Sandrine. So the light outside is coming from the sun. The sun is not right next to you. The sun is far, far away. But the light is right here. But the light is not separate from the source. The light is but the sun's light. And if for any moment, if even for but a moment, there would be a separation between source and you, it would go completely dark. Because the light is only shining insofar as it has an unbroken connection to the source. So when we talk about spiritual realms being filled with godly light, what does it mean? It doesn't mean that when you walk into that realm, you got to put on sunglasses. It's not what it means. What it means is that when you walk into that realm, or float, or whatever it is into that realm, when you're in that realm, what's obvious and what's apparent is source, not the light. The light means, when you see the light, what it means is that you're aware of source. That's what light is. Light means awareness of source, and it's manifest in this space as light. But you know that the light only exists because of source. Right? You know that when you walk outside, it's light during the day because of the sun. It's not due to any other reason. So the light is sunlight. So when you go into a spiritual realm, or wherever that is, right? That spiritual realm. When we talk about spiritual realms that have more light, what that means is more awareness of source. So here's the rule. Imagine, again, where we have limited, the construct of our minds is limited to all the limitations of our reality, time and space. So we're using these types of spatial analogies and discussions, but try your best to strip it away from these types of limitations and understand the more abstract concept. But I'm going to use the language that we can all relate to. So imagine a hierarchy of realms. The higher you go, the greater the light. The lower you go, the less, or the lesser the light. What do I mean by that? The less apparent the source is, the lower you go. In other words, as existence becomes more concretized and materialized, it moves further and further away from consciousness of source, awareness of source, transparency to source, and what becomes sensed is more self and less source. So in the highest of realms, what's sensed is source, not self. The lower you go, the more self is sensed and not source. If we were to draw this, let me see if I can do this. Trusty pen. Let's see if we can pull this off. If we were to depict this, do you guys see that white screen? The whiteboard?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
All right. If we were to depict this, one of the ways that I would say to depict it would be, whoa, that's a very curvy line. Let me try that again. Hold on, let me get an eraser going on. Okay. That's a very lopsided triangle. Okay, my apologies for that. But the way we could describe it as, the greater the light, the more expansive the light is at the top, and the lower you go, the more narrow, the more confined, or the less apparent the light is. And I specifically wanted to draw this inverted triangle because it's going to play a very big role in our understanding of today's conversation. So, again, it's kind of a funnel where it's broad at the top and narrow at the bottom. So there's a lot of light, a lot of awareness, a lot of spiritual and divine and godly consciousness at the top. The lower you go, the less source is apparent and the more self becomes apparent. Specifically, the Kabbalists speak of 4 worlds, 4 realities. Let me continue my drawing attempts. Okay, specifically, Kabbalah speaks of 4 realities. We have the world of Atzilut, which is the top world, the world of Bria, which is the next world down, the world of Yetzirah, the next world down, and finally at the bottom is the world of Asiya. So I'm going to take a moment to write this out. It's hard to write, by the way, on a surface that's vertical, at least for me. Surface is standing up straight. Let's see if I can pull this off. Atzilut, Bria, that's an R. Yetzirah, that's also an R. And Asiya. Yes? Looks okay so far? Unmute yourself if everything is making sense so far, or if at least the picture is coming clear.
Looks great. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we have 4 worlds here. And again, there are many, many, many gradations. There are an infinite number of realms and realities on this journey from source to creation, from highest to lowest. But these are four defined realities as Kabbalah describes them. Four general categories of existence. You should know by now that the number 4 is significant, right? And essentially, this is the topic of our conversation last few weeks about the 4 letters of God's name, Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. The 4 letters of God's 4-letter ineffable name, the name that we don't pronounce the way it's written, the Yud followed by the Hey, followed by the Vav, followed by the Hey. And you might not be surprised to find out that this highest world corresponds to the Yud, the next realm to the Hey, the next realm to the Vav, and the last to the Hey. And that, of course, is, let me draw some dashes in between, just to kind of disconnect. Actually, let me do something better. Erase that. Do something else. You draw lines in between, just so we're not drawing out God's name. But there you see, essentially, the 4 worlds, the 4 letters of God's name, and this hierarchy. Now, why is one world higher than the other? I'm asking a question that I've already answered a few times this morning. Why is one world considered to be higher than the other? Right? The answer is simple. How aware is the world of its source versus how self-aware is it? So in the world of Atzilut, the highest world, right, there's complete awareness of source and a complete lack of awareness of self. In fact, in that world, you don't even have angels. You don't have creatures that are even slightly self-aware. Why? Because on that it's considered to be a completely spiritual world or godly world where the only thing that is sensed is God. So why is it called a world? Because there's still the idea of the 10 sefirot, light and vessels, which we spoke about a few weeks ago. You still have the construct of a world, but without the consciousness of an identity other than source. So it's still completely God-centric and completely God-focused and God-aware, but with the structure of a world, light and vessel. The next world down, Atzilut means emanation. The world of Atzilut is the world of emanation. Why is it called emanation? Emanation is different than creation. Spoiler alert, Bria, the next world, is the world of creation. Like Bereshit, Bara Elokim. Bara Bria means create. This is not yet created. Atzilut is not yet created. It's like, emanated. It's like, the example that's used is a candle from another candle. Right? A fire from another fire. When a lit candle touches an unlit candle and transfers its flame, it's not creating new light, it's transferring the light in a very subtle and smooth fashion. So the world of emanation it's God, it's godliness transferred to a world, to a realm, but it's still godliness. It's still the same fire. The next world down is Bria, which is the world of creation. Okay, now we're dealing with created beings. This is now where angels emerge. And this is where some sort of semblance or taste of self-awareness creeps in. Just enough to know that one is being aware of God as opposed to, I'm not even the one that is aware of God. It's just divine awareness. So in the world of Atzilut, the highest realm, it's complete divine awareness. Let me try this. Can you guys see that red dot? Does that come through?
Yes.
Great. So in the world of emanation, it's complete divine awareness. It's not even the self that is aware of God or the thing or the angel that's aware of God. It's just godliness. The next realm down, creation, is now entities that are aware of God. Yetzirah is the next world, which is the world of formation. Started or generated or become self-aware, now they're already forming into their own patterns of existence and self. And finally, the world of Asiya is the world that is known as the world of action. And that is when everything becomes concretized. There are two halves of this world, which I'm now signifying with a dotted line. So there's a spiritual world of action and the physical world of action. Guess what? You are here. I feel like a mall map drawer, right? You are here. You and I, we're in that last tip of the iceberg of reality. The lowest half of the world of Asiya, the physical side of the world of action. So, it begins with God, but the worlds begin with the world of Atzilut, the world of emanation, the highest world. It's a world of godliness. It's a completely spiritual world with pretty much no sense of self. Sense of self begins with the world of Bria, creation, then formation, action, and then the physical side of the world of action, and that is the reality that we are in. Now, we typically, you and I, we can't look up and see what's stacked above us. And either way, it wouldn't be spatial. It wouldn't be physically by craning our necks upward that we would even see these. I mean, these realms are right in front of us, next to us, inside of us. So it's not like spatially upward. The reason why it's depicted or described as higher and lower is because that's how our brains think. Our brains think that higher is closer to that which is loftier, right? So that's how we think and speak. That's how our language is constructed. But in truth, the more Kabbalah you study, the more you realize that it has nothing to do with spatial considerations, right? Where are these four worlds? Right here, right? They don't exist elsewhere. They're right here at any given moment. So it's not higher or lower. It's just deeper and deeper levels of reality. But just to have clarity of our conversation, we're going to refer to them as higher and lower. Higher, the highest world is a world completely transparent to God. The lowest world is a world that is completely opaque to God. So let me draw that contrast. Transparency versus opaqueness or opacity. Probably opaqueness. We are completely opaque to divine reality. You walk outside, you look around, right? You don't see God. Yeah, you can meditate and conjure up the image of God 100%, but that's you, right? Peeling back layers or impressing God upon the fabric of the universe, which is not apparently divine as such, right? That's something that human beings are able to achieve and study and find out and figure out and apply and meditate on. That's wonderful, and that's a lot of what we do here in Sunday mornings at Kabbalah Coffee. So by no means am I minimizing that, but what I'm saying is that's not that's not like the first thing that you see. First thing that you see is stuff. Stuff that says, I am, I exist. Now, even if it doesn't talk, but that's the energy it gives off. That tall skyscraper says, I exist. That tree says, I exist. The person next to you on the sidewalk says, I exist. You say, I exist. Second layer is maybe there's something beneath the surface. But the default setting is not transparency. In our world, the default setting is opaque. You don't see the Creator. The Creator is hidden from sight. The higher you go, metaphorically, the higher you go in this structure of worlds, the more transparent, the more obvious the Creator is, the more obvious God is, the less obvious creation is. So, Kabbalah speaks of many things that exist within this hierarchy. There are souls that come from emanation. Souls that come from Atzilut. There are souls that come from Bria. There are angels on the level of Bria, angels on the level of Asiya, and of course, our physical lives are all the way down here. So, what distinguishes one from the other, as you now know, is primarily the idea of transparency to truth. How transparent are you, or is this, to absolute truth with a capital T? And or as opposed to, how caught up are you, or it, this, in the falsehood of believing or taking your own existence a little too seriously? So how true, how clearly do you see truth versus how caught up are you in what's not so true, or what's not true at all, i.e. self-generated existence? And that distinguishes one from the other. Which is why, in our prayers even, these are in the prayer books, not in the Kabbalistic works, but prayer books, prayers for everyone, we talk about different angels and how the angels acknowledge God. And some say, Kadosh, 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 holy, holy, holy. And some burn up, the Srafim, burn up with a fiery fervor. It says some angels are more intellectual, and some angels are more emotional. And the more intellectual angels understand and perceive who they are and who God is, and they perceive the distance between their perception and the truth, and the distance between them and God. And because of that, they yearn for something higher, for something greater, for a higher connection. They strive, they yearn for something greater because of their understanding. And then you have the emotional angels who don't have so much understanding, but they feel the gap. They feel their own loneliness. They sense themselves, right? They're not in the world of Atzilut. They sense themselves, but they sense at the same time the distance. They don't understand it intellectually, but they feel it. And that feeling causes a rapturous desire and yearning and love, or a state of awe toward God. So there's another way of understanding these four dimensions. There's another paradigm by which we may understand these four dimensions and personalize them in our lives. Because just as these four dimensions exist within the hierarchy, within the structure of existence itself, they also exist within the miniature universe, which is the human being. You and I are an olam katan. We are a small world, which means that we are the microcosm of the entire span of existence of creation itself. So if these four worlds exist within the olam gadol, within the larger world, you better believe they exist inside you and I as well. So what is your Atzilut? What is your Beriah? What is your Yetzirah? And what is your Asiyah? What is your emanation, creation, formation, and action? These are four dimensions of the human being and the human experience. So let me decode these for you right now.
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Yep.
Yeah. So I actually have two questions. One is that in our sense of time and space is Asiya. Is time and space not defined, or does it exist different? I mean, it seems like the way we understand it, it would not necessarily be appropriate for any of the other dimensions.
The way we understand it, correct. But if you recall, in chapter number 18, in our text, we actually spoke about space, the way it exists in the world of Yetzirah. We spoke about how the angels also, although they don't have bodies, but they also have distinguishing characteristics. They have their own modality of understanding or feeling or serving God. And that distinguishes one from the other, which constitutes somewhat of a spiritual space or definition around them, differentiating one angel or spiritual being from the other. Even what we're doing today, differentiating one realm from the other, constitutes some measure of space, not the space, the physical space that you and I inhabit, but the concept of space being a defining quality that differentiates one realm or one entity from the other. Space absolutely exists higher than the world of Asiya, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so
And
again,
also-
even the fact that even the fact that we have labels for 4 different realities, that itself indicates that there is some notion of space. Now, but again, not the space, not the same as a parking space. My favorite example, 2 cars can't park in the same parking space, or you can't be in 2 spaces at the same time, but there is still some measure of space. Now, let's talk about what these 4 worlds look like within the human being. And this is very important, and this is going to connect with how I started today's class and what I wrote in the email about love. Because, and in my opinion, this is a construct and a paradigm and a teaching that has been very much lacking in most love or relationship discourse conversation, and it's really devastating to love and relationships when this construct is absent. So let me explain what these 4 worlds are inside of you and I. And you'll see how we have these 4 realities inside of us. So what is Atzilut? What is emanation? Well, by now you know it's a godly world. In our human terms, it represents the spiritual. You see how my computer is a little bit not glitchy, but it's a little bit skipping right now. So my pen is also skipping. So, but maybe it looks cool. Maybe it looks like a different font, like some sort of computer, digital age robot font, which totally works for me. That is supposed to say spiritual. Okay? As I mentioned before, there are different angels. Some are intellectual, some are emotional. I already gave you a hint. That was my spoiler alert. So the world of emanation represents spiritual. The world of creation or Bria is intellectual. Wow, that's not at all coming out. Okay. By the way, I'm actually writing with this pen, but it's not coming out. So let me see if I can try to erase this and write again. Listen, it may not work with the writing, but you'll have to take my word for it. Even if I don't write it down, that's what it is, right? Even if you don't see it, you'll have to take my word for it that this is in all right, that's intellectual. Formation is emotional. Maybe, maybe not. And the world of action, Asiya, is physical. Spiritual, intellectual, emotional, and physical. These are the 4 worlds inside the human being and the human dynamic. The higher you go, the more transparent to a higher truth. The lower you go, the more opaque it is to a higher truth. This is the structure. This is the hierarchy. This is the setup. Spiritual, intellectual, emotional, and physical, Atzilut, Beriah, Yetzirah, Asiya, emanation, creation, formation, action, Yud, and Hey, and Vav, and Hey. All of these 4 labels are parallel. They all exist on the. They're all reflections of the same 4 dynamics, just written out in different ways. Macrocosm, microcosm, God's name, the way we perceive it. Either way, these are the 4 levels. Now, let's talk about the column I want to focus on here, because this is going to be the most helpful for us, because it's in our terms, are these 4 labels that are right here that I just wrote. Right? The physical, the emotional, intellectual, and spiritual from the bottom up. These are really important, because this is how we perceive the world. This is how we live. Right? We have spiritual sensations or spiritual awareness. We have spiritual yearnings. We have a spiritual world and reality that we inhabit, in other words, within our own self. We have intellectual, right? We have our mind, the way we think, the way we understand. We have emotional, the way we feel. The physical is the way we act, what we do, our bodies, right? More the physical, the concrete. The goal in life, in general, is to align your worlds, is to make sure that they are all centered on top of each other, directly on top of each other. And what I mean is, and I spoke about this a little bit, I believe, last week, if your spiritual values, right, or your spiritual, like your deepest spiritual health, your deepest beliefs are in one place, but then your mind is occupied in another place, and your emotions are in a third place, and what you're doing day to day in life is in a fourth place, you are going to feel very scattered and likely very tense and stressed out and likely not so happy, because you're doing something that you don't feel excited about, that doesn't align with the way you think or your deepest held values. And that can be toxic for the human condition. As I used this example before, imagine a spine that is, God forbid, out of alignment and zigzagging as it goes up or as it goes down. That is a very unhealthy situation. And that's going to cause the person who has that spine tremendous pain, right? When a spine is misaligned, it can cause, God forbid, tremendous pain. And the same thing is true with the hierarchy of our spiritual worlds. If they are not aligned with each other, if our values are here, and our ideas are there, and our emotions are somewhere else, and our actions are completely disconnected, it's not healthy. We tell ourselves it doesn't matter what we do, right? What we do doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference, right? Maybe somebody can say, as long as I don't hurt anybody, it doesn't matter what I do. Maybe. It's a good line. You can tell yourself that. But if you're not doing something that you feel that are aligned with your ideas and your beliefs, then there's a misalignment there. And even if it's not today or not tomorrow, but at some point, it's going to cause us some sort of pain, that being out of alignment. That's why many people have an experience where they wake up one day, decades into their life, and ask themselves the question, what am I doing? What am I doing with my life? Is this what I want to do? That's a product, some people call it a midlife crisis. That is a product of waking up one morning and discovering that what we're doing on this level, which is where we exist most of the time, by the way, in the physical. You know why? Because also on a cosmic level, you are here, right? Remember I wrote that? You are here. So even within the microcosm, you and I exist primarily in the physical. That's where we are most of the time, right? So when you wake up one day and find that your physical, what you're doing, what you do on a day-to-day basis. You wake up in the morning, what are you doing? Where are you going? What happens when you get back from wherever you went to, right? When we discover that physical doesn't speak to the higher things, to what we love, to what our ideas tell us, to what our values tell us, then a person might say, I'm unhappy. I'm unhappy because my physical is being isolated and it's out of alignment with my other stuff. So let me check in. Does what I'm saying make sense? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And by the way, it doesn't have to take decades. It doesn't have to take a long time to figure this out, right? It could take a very short amount of time to quickly realize that being misaligned, being out of alignment is not healthy. That might be an obvious thing and it might be an immediate thing. It's always good to have that realization. It's always good because knowing the problem is already half the cure, right? Identifying the problem is already getting yourself on the road to the healing. Without understanding the problem, a person might just be unhappy, dissatisfied, tense, right? Miserable, God forbid, and not even know why. And then how do you fix it? Right? It's like a relationship, which, don't worry, I'm getting back to. This is, after all, our class entitled Modern Love. But it's like in a relationship where somebody is not happy and they don't know why. So if you know why, at least you can try to fix it. But if you don't even know why, then where do you go from there? So the first step is understanding this hierarchy. It's not just you, and it's not just me. This is an absolute reality within the structure, the fabric of existence itself. These are the four realms, or the four dimensions, four layers, whatever you want to call it, four worlds that God has impressed, projected, manifest throughout existence itself. And it's within us as well. We have these four dimensions. And if you notice, this triangle operates very nicely. It's centered. But imagine if it's misaligned. It's going all sorts of directions. It's not a triangle anymore. And it's not healthy. So the more we recognize that this is at the core of who we are, and not only the core of who we are, but the core of what everything is, then we can start looking at things and unhappiness through a different lens. And we can ask ourselves, one second. Let me start from the top. What are my deepest spiritual values? What do I really believe in? Not what someone else wants me to believe in. What do I really believe in? And then ask yourself, are the things that I'm reading, studying, pontificating about, are they aligned with that? Are my emotions aligned with that? And am I acting on that? That's some really good questions right there. Right? Ask yourself these questions. Start working on alignment. And as Kabbalah teaches, we get less tense. We get less unhappy. We become more, not necessarily satisfied to the point that we don't want to grow anymore, but we become more at peace or at ease with who we are and what we're doing. By the way, you should know, when you look at Torah, you open up Torah, and you read through the 613 commandments, the mitzvot in Torah, you will notice that they all exist where? They all exist right down here. Physical. Physical. Do this, don't do that. Why? Why isn't it speaking up here? Because that's already in alignment. The whole purpose of Torah is to get us in alignment all the way down to the bottom. It's about getting in alignment at the bottom of who we are, on the physical level, so that our day-to-day actions are aligned with our highest spiritual truths. That's the mystery of Torah. Torah is the greatest spiritual truth that has been gifted to us all the way in a physical manifestation, in a physical dimension, which speaks to physical actions, telling us what to do and how to do it, so that when we do it that way, we are immediately in alignment with the spiritual. Are you with me on this? So Torah will tell you how to wake up in the morning. Jewish law will tell you how to get dressed in the morning. For those of you that are taking the Judaism at Home course, you know what I mean. Right first, right? Get the right sleeves in. But Judaism will tell you, Halakha will tell you, how to do this and how to do that and how to eat and how to sleep and how to everything. Why? What, so nosy of Torah? What, Torah can't just stay up here? No, because that would be pointless. Right? If Torah would speak spiritual truths on a spiritual level, so what's the point? Now your soul is aligned, your spirit is aligned? It was already aligned. The whole point is to get your physical aligned. The whole point is to get your actions aligned with the spiritual. You want to be healthy? You want to be less tense? You want to be happier? Good. Get in alignment. It sounds like an infomercial for some sort of Kabbalistic chiropractor. But whatever, I'm just saying, this is the bottom line, is that we have these four dimensions. If they're out of alignment, it's not healthy. We need to be in alignment. Torah helps us be aligned. But I want to talk about relationships now. because this is really important. And I think, like I said before, I think this is something that the world misses, at least our society misses by a mile. Okay. Let's jump in. In relationships, in a relationship between two people, there are likewise these 4 dimensions of compatibility. You can be compatible spiritually. You can be compatible intellectually. You can be compatible emotionally. And you can be compatible physically. What does that mean? First of all, it means that you have to know yourself on all these levels to know, because how do you know if you're compatible if you don't know where you are spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, or physically? I mean, usually physically we know, but right, the other ones may require a little bit more thought. So, number one, you got to know yourself. But now let's talk about compatibility. You can be compatible with somebody spiritually, and that means that you share the same deep and true values. Like those unshakable core values of life you share. Intellectual means you share the same philosophies. Oh, your philosophies align. That's a little bit lower than your values. Philosophies are already how you think about things. The spiritual are the things that are so deep and so core and so true to you that it's not even an intellectual thing. It's a core soul thing. Below that is intellectual. That's how you think about things. That's another layer of compatibility. Do we, philosophically see the world in the same way and think about the world in the same way? Emotionally, do we get excited about the same things? Right? Are we happy about the same things? Do our emotions align? That is emotional compatibility. Physical, that would be attraction. That would be attraction. That would be, I like the way that person looks, right? That's a physical compatibility, is physical attraction. That's the easiest one to explain, right? That's the one that most people are familiar with. Which brings me to the problem with relationships. What's the problem with relationships? Most of them begin in the reverse order of the hierarchy. Remember how everything emerges from the source? Top down. From the broadest to the narrowest. From the widest to the most condensed point. The greatest light to the lowest light. The most transparency to the most opacity. So that's how everything flows from above to below. Well, the problem is that most times, and when I say most times, yeah, pretty much all the time, right? How do relationships begin? I can't say all the time. I would say a vast majority of times, it begins right here with the physical, right? I see somebody, I like the way they look, strike up a conversation, right? Now we're talking, right? Now in both the literal and the metaphorical sense, right? Now things are getting going. But it starts with the physical. See, here's the problem. Here's the problem. If you notice, I drew this as a triangle. And I drew this as a triangle, number one, because it reflects the notion of greater light and less light as it flows downward, but also because of the point that I'm about to make right now, which is, what is the foundation of the relationship? If the foundation of a relationship is on physical compatibility or physical, attraction, then you are putting a relationship and you are building the relationship on a very narrow point. Why do I say it's a very narrow point? Because the one truth about life, the one truth about human beings is that their physical appearance will change. Sorry for breaking the news. Sorry for being that person. Spoiler alert, no one ever looked the same. 25, 35, 45, 55, 65, 75, 85, 95, 105, 115, and 120. No one ever looked the same. It's not possible. Right? So looks, the physical, is the most temporal, is the most changing. It's the least permanent. It's the least solid. So I'll ask you the question right now. Would you build your skyscraper, the skyscraper of your dreams, would you build that like I drew this triangle? You got to be crazy to do that. You're going to build a permanent structure. You're going to build your edifice on an upside down triangle on a single point. What are you, Meshuggah? The whole thing's going to collapse in a second. What are you thinking? And yet, when it comes to relationships, what could go wrong? I like the way they look. Shouldn't that be enough? Do we really need to speak about this? Do we really need to explain how, if it's based on the physical, how that is literally building a building on, first of all, a single point. Second of all, quicksand, because it's going to change and shift. The whole thing is nonsensical. So the whole notion of going, listen, I'm not, I want to just comment on what I'm about to say. This is not a criticism. This is just pointing out a fundamental flaw in the structure and in the system and really the thinking of how modern society thinks about love and relationships. So it's not a criticism and any specific context or whatever. It's just a general comment on the structure that is working against building lasting relationships. The structure, the system itself is working against building a lasting relationship. Again, why? Because a lasting relationship is not built on the one point that is the narrowest and the most susceptible to change. That's not good building. You build typically on the widest, deepest foundation possible. And where is that widest, deepest foundation? That's at the top of this hierarchy. The spiritual, the world of emanation, Atzilut, the Yud of God's name, that's the deepest, that's the broadest point. That's the greatest foundation. So in human terms, what that means is the greatest foundation for a relationship is being in a relationship with someone who shares your deepest held values. If you can find someone that shares your deep values and someone that you can, intellectualize with and connect with emotionally, you feel connected with them, you feel drawn to them, and physically you like the way they look, right? There's attraction. But let's go back to the top. If you find someone who shares the same spiritual values as you, like at the core, not intellectually, because that could change also. Ideas change. I'm talking about soul values, like core values. You might say, well, how do I know those aren't going to change? You never know, right? There's no guarantees in life. But if you can get to the core of yourself and identify what are my core values, and get to the core of the other and find out what are their core values, if they align, the chance that your relationship is going to weather the storms, plural, of life and of relationships is much, much, much greater. Why? Because you've now built your relationship on the broadest, deepest, widest possible foundation, as opposed to building it on something that by definition is already falling over, is already teeter-tottering from side to side. It's already swaying with lack of stability. If you can build it not on the physical attraction, but on the spiritual values, then you're talking. Now you're talking. So what's the problem? What's the problem? The problem is, when you go to a bar or a club, you go to a party or an event, what do you notice about someone? The physical. That's the tip of the iceberg. That's the most external, the lowest, and that's what you notice. That's what we notice as human beings. And that's what gets us, that's what starts us off. But whoever said that a relationship should end there? Typically what happens is, you see somebody, You like the way they look. You go over, strike a conversation. Oh wow, amazing! We like the same movies. Well, that's basically it. At that point, you like the same movies, the same music, some shared experiences. I'm pretty sure we're done here, right? This is soulmates. How many times have I heard people having spent years together, and they find out 2, 3, 4, 5 years later that they don't share the same core values? Whether it's related to building a family or other core values, they don't share the same core values. And this conversation and this insight, this realization only happens years later. I know it's kind of awkward at a party or at a club or at a bar, and I'm not recommending necessarily these venues, but let's just say, right, it's kind of hard to go over, to saunter up to someone and say, by the way, what are your core values? I don't know if that's always the best opening line. But if we're talking about building a relationship, right, that is the core of a relationship. I've been asked over the years, so what's like the whole Chabad dating scene like, or Orthodox dating? This came up in our broadcast that we had a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, on the Netflix miniseries Unorthodox, where you see dating happen for a very short amount of time. And I'm not going to comment on Orthodox because my wife Leah and Miriam Lipsker, they already had a conversation about that, which was an excellent conversation and very illuminating. But I want to talk about just in general the notion of dating in the Jewish scene dating. When I say Jewish, I mean like in more Orthodox communities or Hasidic communities or Chabad community. And you may know this, but the dating is usually much the amount of time that is spent dating is usually much more condensed, much shorter than what typically is dating looks like in the larger in America, in the larger society. And people ask why. What's the deal? Like, you only know somebody for a month or two and you're already ready to get engaged and get married? Like, how that seems reckless. And I get it. I hear that because we're approaching it from the upside down paradigm, right? Where we're not having those conversations about spiritual values for years. So how can you marry someone before you have that conversation? And it's going to take a few years to get there. But you know what happens in Orthodox circles, Hasidic circles, is you get a sense, even before you go out with the other person, what their spiritual values are. Well, how do you do that? This is where shadchanim come in place, shadchan, not a matchmaker saying, hey, you're going to marry you. That's not how that works. But somebody, a mutual friend, an acquaintance that knows both parties, knows the families, knows that they come from similar backgrounds, similar places, share similar goals, aspirations, dreams in life. Spiritual aspirations. Well, knowing that, obviously the two parties have to meet and have to have these conversations themselves. It's not just, assumed that that's the case. You have to have that conversation. But once those conversations happen and you realize that you're spiritually aligned with the other person, well, then you have to make sure that intellectually you can hold conversations, and emotionally you feel a connection. You feel a magnetism, an attraction, a connection to the other. Well, or the physical attraction has to be there, obviously. But when you have everything and everything lines up, you have to date for 2 years? Maybe. But why? Right? If it aligns, if everything's good, what else do you need? So oftentimes, here's how it works. Here, I'm going to give you another example. I'm jumping around a little bit to kind of, give you somewhat of a holistic or larger picture of the points that I'm trying to make. So I'm skipping around a little bit, but it's all speaking to the same idea, the same hierarchy. Another example. Imagine you move to a new city, and you need a dentist, but you don't. It's a brand new city. You've never been to the dentist there. You don't know any dentists, so you need a dentist. How are you going to find a dentist? I'm going to give you one scenario. You go to a bar, you find out which is the trendiest bar, hang out, you wear something nice, And then, at a certain point in the evening, you find someone that looks attractive, and you go over to them and you have small talk, and you make small talk, and you have some drinks, and you hang out. And maybe you hang out for more than just one time. Maybe you go on multiple dates. And you hang out for a little while. And then finally, at some point later, much later on, you pop the question, hey, are you a dentist? How efficient is that? Not very efficient. If you're looking for a dentist, that's a very inefficient way of doing it, because what are the odds that the person that you're attracted to physically will automatically be a dentist? That seems like a very foolish way of going about it. What, just because I'm attracted to them, automatically they should be qualified as a dentist? Find out who's a dentist, and then make sure that everything else works out. So what's the proper approach? Is you ask somebody, or you Google, or whatever it is, you find out who's a dentist, you look up reviews, you go to the office, you get a sense if you like what they're doing or you like the whole operation, and then you get your dental work done. But that's a shorter process, right? Imagine if you had to date all the people in the city before finding out who in the bar is a dentist. That's a very long process. I could see why it takes a while to land a dentist. That's why it takes many times and right? It takes a while to find a dentist that way. But if you start with identifying who's a dentist, and then make sure that you like their practice, and you like the office, and you like the way they work, that makes it more efficient. Make sense? Yes? Okay, you probably understand the analog here. If you're looking for a soulmate, someone that shares the same spiritual values, finding someone that shares the same spiritual values, starting off by physical attraction, right, is a very, again, I'm sorry for speaking very bluntly, it's a very inefficient way of doing so. Because you're starting with physical attraction and then hoping that they're a dentist, if that's your spiritual value, or whatever your spiritual value is, right? It's hoping and wishing, and sometimes I think we do this. Sometimes I think we we project our spiritual values on the other without ever asking them, because we wish it to be so. We hope that they're a dentist. Please be a dentist. I'm looking for a dentist. I like everything else, but I really hope you're a dentist. And then when we find out, they were never a dentist. They never, at any point in time, were they a dentist. We wanted to imagine or hope or dream they were a dentist. They were never a dentist. Now we're crestfallen. So it all begins in the beginning. It all begins in how we begin. Do we begin on the lowest rung, on the most fragile point of any relationship, which is the physical dimension, or do we begin with the widest part, with the most stable part and the most enduring part of ourselves and the other and of a relationship, which is the spiritual dimension? Okay, what I want to do now is check in with all y'all. I'm going to stop share. I hope I don't lose the screen, but we'll find out. Okay, but I want to see all of you. So let me check in, make sure that what I'm saying makes sense. Yes? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Yeah.
So this is the Kabbalah of relationships. So now you know. It's good to have a construct in our own minds, somewhat of a visual, a Kabbalistic, way to imagine levels of compatibility. And Kabbalah gives us a beautiful way, a beautiful picture of understanding all this. 4 worlds, higher to lower, broader to narrower. It gives us the names, Atzila, Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, emanation, creation, formation, action, spiritual, intellectual, emotional, physical. It gives us these terms. We talk about alignment, but then we talk about how to build a relationship. By the way, I hope I emphasized it enough. I don't know if I did, but let me, just in case I didn't, let me re-emphasize. A healthy relationship will have compatibility on all 4 levels. I'm not suggesting find someone who's spiritually compatible and then, it doesn't matter what, don't worry about your physical attraction. I'm not saying that. It's good to have compatibility on all 4 levels. But the question is, What's the most essential? What's the key? What is going to hold a couple through difficult times? Whether external or internal, whether, stuff that we face from the outside or stuff that, challenges of the two individuals. Shared core values are by far the glue, the greatest glue that can hold the couple together. It's not a guarantee. There's no guarantees in life, right? So there's never a guarantee that something is going to be, everlasting, happily ever after. But the goal is to give ourselves the best shot. It's really important to understand this hierarchy and to seek to connect in that type of way with the other. And so that means asking the questions of the other. The questions that we might be afraid to ask, right? What are your values? What do you believe about this, that, or the other? And it may be uncomfortable. It may be a little like, why am I asking these things, or what are they going to think? But what's the alternative? To be surprised years later to find out that person doesn't share core values with you, and you realize that the physical has changed already, and when that core stuff is not there, so then what's left? That's a far worse alternative than to have that open conversation.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I wasn't sure if I was in yet. So when we started the conversation today, you introduced us talking about relationships as in the way that you're talking about it now, as friendships, as with family, and so on. It seems though at this point you're talking about a relationship between two people in a marriage or a partnership or so on.
More romantic relationship.
Romantic, yeah. Right. So I think what I'm confused about, I was thinking about the pyramid in the way as you described it, as one that can be applicable to any relationship rather than specifically a romantic relationship. Is that the intention, or is that...
Yeah, well, I have a few intentions, to be honest. One intention is, number one, to describe the four worlds in a way that is understandable, that is immediately relatable and understandable for all of us. That's number one. Number two is to, the way they exist. Number two is to personalize it. Number three was to talk about the alignment, which I think is very important in life, that we're doing what we feel good about, what we understand to be true, and what speaks to our values. And another point was to speak about the more romantic relationships and to understand why it is that so often we are kind of making it more difficult than it needs to be, because we're building it on very, very narrow spaces. At the same time, that's not to take away from the application in a broader sense to relationships. So in a broader sense, other types of relationships, you can parse the four worlds in many different ways. When we talk about friendship, so what is the spiritual? What is the intellectual? What is the emotional? What is the physical? We would have a different way of understanding that. The physical would be not necessarily physical attraction, but let's say what we're doing for the other, or those moments in which we're physically interacting with the other, and then it just goes up from there. So yes, the short answer, well, I think there were a few angles to what you said, but number one, do these four worlds and four dimensions apply to all relationships? Yes. Is my intention to focus specifically on romantic relationships? That's one of my intentions, because I think it's a very applicable, it's a very important takeaway on that level. But again, it's not to take away from a broader application. So it was my intention, but not my exclusive intention. But yeah, how would we apply it to other relationships? We would have to discuss that in with regard to other relationships. But on a basic level, we do things for each other, and we have moments in which we connect emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. And the goal is, look, when it comes to love your fellow as yourself, we've talked about this many times. The only way to truly love your fellow as yourself is by looking at their soul. Is by looking at who they are spiritually. Because by looking at the external stuff, there's too much that distinguishes one from the other. We see this today. There's too much that physically distinguishes one from the other that if we're basing relationships solely on the physical, there's too much that gets in the way that can impede our sense of that oneness. Whereas when we look at the core, when we identify with ourselves not by our body but by our soul, not by the lowest level of that pyramid, but by the highest level, if that's how we see ourselves, then that's how we're going to see the other, and then we're going to find more spiritual compatibility than the other stuff. And that's a paradigm shift. Adam, did you want to jump in?
So how does this apply to like family or something like that? When when you're trying to apply this compatibility to people in your family, you can't choose these people. These people are in your life, just you're related. What do you do when that compatibility is really like it's not there?
Right, that's a good question. So when we're talking, let's say, about maybe choosing a spouse or significant other, that's one thing. But what about parents, right? No child can ever choose their parents. I mean, that would be an interesting thing if that would be a thing, right? Imagine if kids could choose their own parents. That would be very complicated. So what happens if you realize that your parents share different core values than you have? It's possible. It's possible, right? What happens then? What happens parents to children the other way around? What happens neighbors, friends, acquaintances, co-workers? It's a challenge. It's a challenge. Can we find common ground somewhere? Can we build a relationship on other levels of compatibility and maybe not get to that deeper place? Can we discover how, notwithstanding the values that are different, there's something even deeper that is aligned with the other? Can we try to break down, even within the spiritual, those barriers that might impede or that might appear to be distinguishing elements? I don't have an answer to all these questions, right? But I think these are some of the ways to think about it. Adam, you asked a great question. Sandy, you asked a great question also. I mean, I think that the questions complement each other. They're all great questions, and maybe that's why I stuck with the example that I used, the type of relationship that I used, because to me that's a very clear cut. It's a very clear cut way of seeing these four worlds at play. We can see these four dimensions and areas of compatibility. We can see them immediate and I think in an obvious way. But it's all to bring out the fact that we have these four realities within us, and they exist. The question that you and I ask ourselves is, am I going to align myself within myself? Am I going to align these with the other? How do I do that? Right? There are some people that I will be closer with, some people that I will be less close with. Maybe it's based on this type of alignment. How do I find greater alignment with someone that looks different than I do, but shares the same values? How do I how do I look past the physical, which is so, honestly, so silly? It is. It really is. How do I look past the physical? Because it's all the container. It's all the container. If you have a diamond, I want to give you an example. If you have a diamond that's worth $1 million, and you have it in a jewelry box, with a nice velvet flip-top thing, or you have it in a brown paper bag, how valuable is a diamond? Yeah?
Same value.
Same value. So what do we say? We say, no, I'm always the velvet nice cover, and they're always, the plain, I don't like that cover. First of all, how dare you? Second of all, doesn't matter. That itself doesn't make a difference. The whole discussion about containers is silly when you're talking about diamonds. Some of you may know this. The Lubavitcher Rebbe used to stand every Sunday for many years, from the mid-1980s till his stroke in 1992. Every Sunday in his synagogue, right outside of his office, 770 Eastern Parkway, Crown Heights, Brooklyn, he would stand and greet thousands and thousands of people from all walks of life. Jew, non-Jew, layperson, scholar, citizen, politician, the mayors, the governors of New York City, heads of state, heads of countries would come by the Rebbe, all waiting in line. And this is after it got to a point where too many people wanted to meet, so there wasn't an opportunity to meet privately with the Rebbe. The Rebbe would just greet everybody in this context. You had a few moments. The Rebbe would always share a blessing, person an opportunity to ask something quickly, share a blessing. The Rebbe would share a blessing and then give every person a dollar bill to give to tzedakah. The Rebbe said, when two people meet, a third person should always benefit. So if you and I are meeting, how does one more person benefit? I'm going to give you $1, give it to charity, give it to someone else, help someone else out. So that's what the Rebbe was once standing. He was in his 90s, and there was a woman, an older woman who was younger than the Rebbe. She wasn't in her 90s, maybe 60s or 70s, and she was standing for hours in line. And she came to the Rebbe, and she was so flabbergasted. She said, "Rebbe, I don't understand. How can you stand for hours and not get tired and not take a seat?" The Rebbe never sat down. How can you stand for hours and not sit down? The Rebbe smiled at her, and she said, "Everyone that comes before me is a diamond. And when you're counting diamonds, you don't get tired. When you're counting diamonds, you don't get tired." But we don't see each other as diamonds. We see a bunch of cases. And we inevitably judge, my case is better than your case, and I like the way this case looks, I don't like the way that case looks. The whole thing is ridiculous, right? The whole thing is not true, because we're not talking about cases, we're talking about diamonds. But that's where we're at. And so another direct implication or message from today's discussion, hopefully, not only pertaining to romantic relationships, is the notion of what it means to get along with somebody, is to realize that the light is at the top. The light is by the soul, in the spiritual dimension, by emanation. Once you get down to the physical, that's the tip of the iceberg. That's like nothing compared to what's really going on underneath the surface. The problem is, in the world we live in an olam hafuch, which means an upside down world, which means take the triangle pointing down, flip it the other way, right? And then submerge most of it underwater, right? Think about like an iceberg or whatever it is, right? That's most of it is underwater, and you have a little bit protruding above the water, just a little bit sticking out. And that's how we go through life. We look at each other and we see, oh, I see who they are, by their external appearance, by the physical. And that becomes it. That becomes the whole story. I know everything about them because I see that little edge, that little fraction of a corner right there, that little point that sticks up above the surface. And you know where it begins? It begins with ourselves. If we don't see beneath our own surface, if we don't have depth to us, then we're not going to see depth in the other. It begins with self-perception. If you and I look at ourselves just on the external, the most external levels, then we're going to necessarily and automatically look at the other through the same lens. And that's problematic. That's where the problems begin. So that's why the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, I've shared this before, chapter 32, Lev, the heart of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says, the key to love your fellow as yourself, not to romantic relationships. The key to love your fellow as yourself, every fellow, every other as yourself, begins by putting your soul before your body. Your soul before your body, not their soul before their body, because that's not going to work. Your soul first before your body, and then you'll look at their soul before their body. If you don't look at yourself that way, how are you going to look at someone else that way? If you judge yourself by your external appearances, by what you do, by the physical part, if that's who you are, if that's what you invest in, then that's how you're going to look at others. And that's a very dangerous situation. We live in a world that tells us to invest and invest and invest and invest in the physical. And listen, it's fine to look good, to feel good. I'm not knocking any of that. But who tells us about investing in the spiritual? Where's that coming from? Madison Avenue is not telling you that. Madison Avenue is only telling you, invest in the physical. Madison Avenue is only telling you, buy this, it's going to look good, the appearance part of it. We live in a very superficial world, in a world of superficiality. And the danger of that is that we start buying into it and believing it to be true. And the danger of that is that we might soon believe that that is the totality of who we are. And then the danger of that is we believe that that's the totality of the other person. And then we say, well, I look different than they do, they look different than me, therefore we don't get along, or we can't get along. That's dangerous. So, I want to share my screen one more time, and then we're going to close out today's class. Let's see if it's still there. This is going to be an experiment in Zoom. Mazel tov, look at that. It's still here. So, in summation, what we explored today are the 4 levels of existence. Atzilut, Beriah, Yetzirah, and Asiya. Emanation, creation, formation, action. Or, in human terms, spiritual, intellectual, emotional, and physical. And we spoke about how important it is in life to understand which is big and which is not so big, which is important and which is a little bit less important, which is broad and which is narrow. We also have to understand how important it is to be aligned all the way through. What we do should reflect how we feel, should reflect how we think, should reflect our core values. And when we relate to others, how important it is to relate not on the lowest level, as we typically get caught up in, but how important it is to relate on the highest level, which is the truest level, which is the deepest level, which is the most enduring level. Whether it's a romantic relationship, or whether it's simply getting along with somebody else who does things differently than you, or who looks differently than you. How important it is to keep the spiritual the most important thing. And so in Kabbalah Coffee, my stated goal in Kabbalah Coffee, and if it's not stated, well, now I'm about to state it, is to peel back the layers and get to deeper truths. To understand better who we are and to expose in a deeper sense who the other person is. And the goal of this series is to increase the love and the tolerance, the respect, the unity that we have with the other. Not with the I'm going to say not, but also, doesn't have to not be, but not with the person you already love, but also them. But with the person that you don't intuitively, naturally say, oh, I want to learn more about that person. I want to hang out with them. The person that you naturally don't do that with. How do you and I get more on the same page? Get a little bit closer, a little bit more loving, a little bit more tolerant, a little bit more accepting. That's the entire point of this series. And I will tell you, is that the point of life? It's not far off. It's really not far off. It's not far off. Like I told you, the Rebbe wrote a letter to somebody saying that your relationship, the challenge in your relationship, is the purpose of your existence. Everything else that you're doing is not why you're here. It's not why your soul was sent down to earth. This is the purpose. This relationship, work at it. Never stop working at it. That's why you're here. If you and I had that clarity in our lives, that relationship that you find difficult, that person that you find to be a nudnik, right, to be grating on you, that, whatever it is, that challenge to interpersonal relationships, that, look at it as your purpose. To fight every day, the good fight, and to find healing. So I want to leave you with this. May we be blessed with the clarity that Kabbalah teaches us, to know thyself and to know others. To know who we are and to know who the other is. and to truly connect in a deep way and in a healthy way with others around us. And in doing so, we will heal ourselves, we will heal our relationships, and literally we will heal our world. And God knows we need healing today more than ever. Thank you very much for joining me today for Kabbalah Coffee. I need to mention a few things, a few very important announcements. So again, this was now the formal conclusion for today's class.